Hi, I thought I'd share with you a live reading of one of my favorite poems, William Blake's Nurse's Song, which is part of his Songs of Innocence collection. Now, this is a poem that I've read over the years many, many times. It's a poem that I like quite a bit. And what I want to do in this reading is to try to figure out the subjective elements, the elements in the text that generates such a favorable response as I read it. Now, when I first read a poem, what I try to do is look for broad patterns to see if there's anything obvious that jumps out at me. And what I'm doing is pulling from a lot of years of reading poetry. So when I look at a short poem that has an even number of stanzas, such as this, 4 stanzas, my first question is, does it fall into a 2+2 structure? In other words, does the poem open with a question and close with an answer? Is there a specific point in the opening of the poem, and is there the opposite point in the second half of the poem? Is there a perspective offered in the first half and a different perspective in the second? And then are we as readers asked to resolve that tension? So initially when I read the poem, I'm disposed to think of this poem as having 2 different parts. Part 1, the first 2 stanzas, and then part 2, the second 2 stanzas. And notice how even the lines are very symmetrical for in each stanza. So I look at the first stanza, and it's describing a scene. You hear the speaker of the poem, the nurse, and she's talking about a scene in which she's observing and also participating. It's in the evening. The children are playing outside on the village green. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of laughter. And the nurse is observing this scene and is very happy. She's at peace. She's calm. The world is still. The day is about to end. The kids are happy. So then what I'll do is look at that sentiment, the sentiments in the first stanza, and then I'll go back and look at the very end of the poem and see if it's symmetrical. The poem opens with a description of a scene in which the nurse is watching the children play, and then the poem ends with a description of the scene and the children are still playing. So if I discount these middle 2 stanzas, I'd say, well, what's changed? What happened? What's the drama? What's the conflict? So then I start to think, well, maybe it's the middle 2 that are really the most important stanzas, at least in terms of the dramatic conflict of the poem. So then when I go to stanza 2, I see what the nurse is doing. She's telling the kids the day is done, the sun is going down, night is falling, it's time for you to come in. You can come back out tomorrow. Now, the nurse is asking the kids, it's telling the kids it's time to come in. Day is over. Now, the kids themselves, the children themselves, have 2 different ways of responding. They could say, okay, it's late, we'll come in, we'll come out again tomorrow. Or they could say, no, we still want to play. So you have a question here, you expect a response here. The tension is right here. The nurse is asking the children to do something, and we need to find out whether the children comply with her request. Now, as I get into the 3rd stanza, the children say, no, it's still light out. It's too early to go to sleep. There's still birds in the sky. The animals are awake. Well, we really want to play. So this is where the crux comes in. The nurse is making a request of the children. The children are saying, no, we don't want to come in. What is the nurse going to do? Is she going to exercise her authority, force the children to come in and suspend their play? Or is the nurse going to defer to the children and say, you can stay out? So there's dramatic tension here. Scene, situation, and setting. The request of the nurse. The response of the kids. So right here in this middle section, or the section between stanza 3 and 4, is a tension. How's it going to be resolved? What is the nurse going to do? Is she going to stick firm to her principles, or is she going to allow the children to stay outside? Well, when I read the final stanza, well, go and play till the light fades away, and then come home to bed. So the nurse says, okay, you're right. Enjoy yourself. Go ahead, play. And then when the light really goes away, it's time to go to bed. And how do the kids respond? They're excited. They leaped and shouted and laughed, and the hills echoed with their joy and laughter. So what I'm seeing is a poem that's really affirmative to the youth, the imagination, the passions, the freedom of children. She's saying, I'm going to put a restriction on you. It's time for you to come in. And then when the kids say no, she realizes, hey, there is still time for them to play. Later in their lives, there might not be that time. Enjoy it while you can. And I think it's the nurse understanding the children's perspective, the nurse's ability to project herself into the situation of the children is what makes this so appealing to me. As an adult, I look at this poem and I see it as a validation of the youthful innocence of kids. And I'm really excited. I'm really pleased that the nurse supports this innocence. Why force the kids to come in when they still have the opportunity to play? Or if I want to expand on this concept, I might say, why force the kids to grow up too soon? They're going to be adults soon enough. Let them enjoy their youth while they can. So for me, the poem works for two reasons. One is that it affirms the value of childhood, that children still can play. But two, it shows how we as adults can look at children and take joy from their pleasure, take joy from their laughter, take joy from their play, and that we could still participate in their world even though we're not directly part of their world. So that's my initial reading. Then what I would do is go and see if there's any research written on this particular poem and how what other people might say about the poem compares to my message. So I did a quick Google search and I found a professor who is providing a summary of the nurse's song, Songs of Innocence. Good summary, old and young, human and natural are unified. Good reading of the text. But then as I continue on in this particular summary, this article, I see that it should be paired with the nurse's song and experience. And then my question is the overall positive sentiment expressed in the nurse's song and innocence different than the sentiment expresses in the nurse's song experience? And in this particular case, these are companion poems, and they do really need to be read together. And what I would see as I go through the nurse's song and experience, I'm going to see a poem that is not only half the length of the nurse's song and innocence, but it's a poem with a much darker tone. And it's a poem in which the nurse, rather than identifying and supporting youthful innocence, instead demands that the children come home. So I might make reference to that in my summary. But basically what I'm doing is something that you guys do on a regular basis. You're looking at a poem, you slow down, you try to figure out what the poem might mean, you start to identify elements in the poem that could carry significance, and then what you do is explain that significance to your readers. The outside research is just introducing another point of commentary, another point in a much broader conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to prove or disprove your main idea. It doesn't have to support your reading. It's another voice contributing to broader discourse. I hope that this reading helped you a little bit. You could tell that there's lots of stumbles and pauses. And even though I've been reading this poem for many, many years, and even though it's a poem I love quite a bit, there's still a good amount of work I need to do in order to fully explain why I respond to this poem so strongly in the manner that I do. And we're going to talk a lot more about that when we get into specific critical schools of reading, such as reader response and reception theory or psychoanalysis. Please take care.